Okay, everybody, we're about to get started with our final panel for the afternoon. So if you would please take your seats and be a little bit more quiet so we can get started. We're running behind schedule now. So I am David Siegel, and this panel is what we're calling the strategic panel. And we've had a lot of good conversations about the convention in the abstract and practice. But to get from here to there, we need people who actually believe that it's a good idea to have a convention to organize and to make that known to their friends and their family, and to pressure state legislatures to actually pass resolutions calling for a convention. And so we'll be talking with several people today who represent different constituencies about what that process might look like. And I'll introduce them as a group, and then I'll call them up one at a time to give short opening remarks, then ask some questions of the group, and then we'll open up to audience questions. So we have with us Annabelle Park from the Coffee Party, then Bill Walker, then George Friday, Jefferson Smith, Shane Larsen, Curtis Olafson, and Bill Norden. Annabelle is, let me shift through from my bios. So Annabelle is a documentary filmmaker and the co-founder of the Coffee Party, which is a growing grassroots democracy movement with over 500,000 people in its network. She co-directed a groundbreaking documentary about America's culture war over immigration called 9500 Liberty with Eric Byler, who's also here today. She studied philosophy at BU and political theory at Oxford as a Marshall Scholar, and she was born in Seoul and immigrated to Houston when she was 9 years old. And with that, I'll welcome her to the podium.
Thank you. Hi, I'm going to stand here because I'm too short for the podium. I look funny. So I'm going to speak here. And I want to start by raising questions designed to make us a little self-conscious about why we're here. So in honor of one of my favorite political figures of the last century, Vice Admiral James Stockdale, who at the 1992 vice presidential debate asked, "Who am I and what am I doing here?" I would like to ask you guys this question. So I'm going to risk having Larry get a little mad at me and say that I think we're here under false pretenses. Yeah. On the official invitation, it says that we are here to talk about the advisability and feasibility of an Article 5 constitutional convention, co-chaired by Mark Meckler of the Tea Party, Larry Lessig of Fix Congress First. And I'm not disputing that. I think that's true. But I think there's another reason why we're here. And that is, we're here to find out if we can actually talk to each other about anything. Because that's in question right now. So it's not just talking. We want to see if we can actually talk to each other as fellow Americans, because we are. And we also want to do it with some civility and reason, right? And let's see, it's almost 5 o'clock, and I think we're doing pretty well. I think we're on our best behavior, right? We haven't seen the kind of behavior that we would see on cable news. So I don't know if we're just trying to make Larry and Mark happy so they don't feel like they have totally failed, or what. But I think we're actually right now proving that it is possible for us to talk to each other. And to me, that's big. Okay, it's big. And I'm going to actually make a prediction that Monday and Tuesday, Larry and Mark and other organizers will be getting emails like, I don't know about the Constitutional Convention, but I'm so glad I went because I love the conversation. And I'm so glad that I was able to talk to people who have very different political views than mine, and I actually like them. right? So I think I'm predicting that that's what's going to happen, and Larry and Mark will break open a bottle of champagne and celebrate, because I think it's extremely important that we are able to, us, people here, walk away from this feeling like there's hope in a better conversation, political conversation, than the one we're currently having, right? So in some ways, like saying, oh, let's get together and talk about the Constitutional Convention is a very clever way to see whether or not we can put aside some differences and deal with this so-called broken political system that we have, right? And we might have, have difference of opinion about why it's broken, but I think most of us agree that it is broken. Is there anyone here who does not think it's broken? Can you just raise your hand? You're a freak! Okay. Okay, so we'll talk later. But most of us, sane people, have come to the recognition our political process is broken. And so there's one way in which I want to offer like a substantive point about this, the Constitutional Convention idea and the whole kind of discussion about the broken system. There's a lot of discussion about kind of the legal reasons why it's broken and legal remedies for it, right? But, and sorry to disappoint you, David, but I think actually the real reason that it's broken, or an important reason it's broken, is that there's a cultural problem here. Not just legal, cultural and maybe even psychological problem that we need to wrestle with. Okay, and we've been calling it polarization, hyperpartisanship, the dividedness, and so on, right? But that's not something we can really fix legally. To me, I don't know. Maybe you guys, brilliant lawyers, can figure out legal ways of remedying the fact that we seem to be afraid of each other and even hateful of each other. But I don't think so. I don't think it's going to take legal remedies. I think it's going to take cultural, social remedies to deal with the partisanship and the polarization, right? So I don't want us to evade this problem and say, oh, okay, if we fix the Constitution, then everything's going to be great. We're going to have a more perfect union. I don't think that's true. But this isn't to argue against the idea of having a constitutional convention at all. So this is what I want to propose. Okay. We need to, basically confront our fear. There's a lot of talk of fear. We've been calling it the fear of the runaway convention. There are 2 sessions, in fact, tomorrow about the runaway convention. Okay? I'm not sure why we couldn't have a discussion about our hope, our dream of a more perfect union and what that would look like, right? But there's this fear in the way of us getting to a place where we can talk about, what can we visualize as a more perfect union, right? So the fear is deep. I think it's very deep. The fear of kind of our political shadow or the other. I think this is really, in a way, the first opportunity I personally have had to confront it. And I'm guessing that's true for some of you as well. And so like really good couples therapists, I think this is the diabolical plan that Mark and Larry hatched up. So basically, they're trying to, not instead of just saying, let's deal with it head on. Let's see if we can get people to play another game, game called, what about a constitutional convention idea? Okay, so I think there's huge benefit in having a dialogue, just like what we're doing today, and trying to do it actually with as many people as we can all over the country. See if we can bring them into conversations about what's in the Constitution, right? and grapple with really difficult questions like what is the social contract right now and what actually should it be, right? So that's, I think that's a very important exercise, okay? And so what I want to actually propose is that treat this as our first date, we had our first date, and I think it's going pretty well. I don't want to get prematurely excited about our first date, but I think it's going pretty well. But I would like to propose us thinking about a second date, let's say a year from now. And in fact, let's make it September 17th, Constitution Day, in Philadelphia, where we have actually a mock convention, where we can actually test out some of the ideas. So let's take the questions that we've been grappling with, let's make it an empirical thing, and just test it out, right? And see what that feels like. Because my guess is that even if we don't actually move towards the Constitutional Convention, having those discussions will be incredibly valuable for individuals who participate and as a culture. We need to have really good conversations about politics that really get to the root of things, that really actually delve into the social contract and not just our issues, right? So, one of the things that, that we have to confront is, okay, can we talk to each other? Do we even like each other? Can we like each other? And what's the implication if we don't? What if, we realize as Americans, we don't actually like each other. We can't talk to each other, right? Then what? Can we actually have a democracy when we can't have a conversation with each other? We don't respect each other. We hate each other. We're afraid of each other. I don't think we really can have a functioning, robust democracy with those cultural components missing, right? And so, if we can have these sort of mock conventions and make it a phenomenon, like, Lollapalooza. Does that mean I have to stop? Okay. Okay. Make it a cultural phenomenon, a trend, and see if we can get to the point where not only do we talk to each other, we like each other, but we're actually even exercising our civic muscle and training for what could be sort of the Olympics of civic engagement, which is a real constitutional convention. So that's the proposal I want to share. I also think you should add a workshop tomorrow, session tomorrow, about something like Dream of a More Perfect Union that isn't so much about fear, but our hopes and dreams. So thank you.
So, two things I'll note for the panelists, just because we're running short on time. Selena will be noting when each of you are running low on time as you speak. I'm sorry we have to do that. And as far as your suggestion, Annabelle, about trying to create a vision, there's one breakout tomorrow that I think will accomplish some of that. There's one on areas where there's a lot of potential for cross-party, cross-ideological organizing that's taking place, where we'll be trying to develop a shared vision among various participants here, led by people from the left and from the right. So some of that will be happening tomorrow, but I agree that we need more of it. So next up is Bill Walker, who for nearly 20 years has been an Article 5 convention advocate. He helped co-found the first national nonpartisan group, Friends of the Article 5 Convention, which is dedicated to causing Congress to call a convention. He's filed 2 federal lawsuits regarding peremptory obligation of Congress to call a convention. And he's also gathered into a single photographic collection taken from official government records, for the first time in U.S. history, the actual texts of over 700 applications from 49 states submitted to Congress for a convention. So Bill, please.
Hi. No doubt many here have studied the official public record of an Article 5 convention, including all pertinent historic documentation, congressional proceedings, judicial rulings, and current events. Originally, I was to prepare a speech for this conference discussing these aspects. However, scheduling circumstances reduced it to this brief summary. For those interested in more details regarding these remarks, I'm leaving copies of the speech at the table. You can also visit our website at www.foavc.org to read this information. FOAVC is different from all other groups at this conference. We are nonpartisan. We have no amendment agenda. Our sole purpose is to cause a convention call. We have the only record of successful accomplishments regarding a convention call. Because of federal lawsuits, the government acknowledged for the first time in history the terms and conditions of a convention call. The Congressional Research Service has agreed to change its authoritative book on the interpretation of the Constitution to reflect corrections submitted by FOAVC. Thus, while others postulate unproved theories of same subject, fiduciary control of a convention, and so forth, we have achieved actual, real results based solely on the public record. As to current events, I'm sure all are aware that Mr. John Guise of Georgia, who is not a member of FOAVC, filed a criminal complaint in July with the Department of Justice against all members of Congress for the violation of oath of office for refusal to call a convention based exclusively on FOAVC information. After review by the FBI and the Georgia U.S. Attorney for frivolousness and substantiality, the complaint was forwarded to Washington, D.C. for disposition. This event marks the end of this issue. It will be officially resolved within a few weeks. Either the government will prosecute congressional members for violation of oath of office for failing to call a convention when mandated by the Constitution, meaning ultimately there will be a convention call, or it will determine members are not required to obey the Constitution, thus officially nullifying Article 5, the Supremacy Clause, and the Oath of Office Clause of the Constitution. So what do we know about the convention from the public record? We know the basis of a convention call is a simple numeric count of applying states with no terms or condition. This, of course, is based on Hawk v. Smith, 1920, and United States v. Sprague, 1931, where the court ruled states operate under the federal Constitution when engaged in the amendment process, cannot alter that process, and that there are no rules of construction, interpolation, or addition permitted in Article 5. In other words, unless textually expressed in Article 5, any theory such as rescission of applications, same subject, identical application language, fiduciary control, and so forth are unconstitutional. We know, as the President cannot participate in the amendatory process as specified in Hollingsworth v. Virginia, 1798, and Congress is forbidden by the necessary and proper clause, that there is no federal legislative control of the convention. We know the public record proves 49 states have submitted over 700 applications for a convention call, first reaching the required two-thirds mark in 1908. The applications can be read at our website. We know the call is peremptory. Congress cannot legally refuse to call. Thus, we know a convention call is mandated now, not sometime in the future. As Congress has refused to call, we know further political efforts to acquire new applications imply Congress has veto power over this overwhelming number of applications, meaning Congress can veto new applications as well. Therefore, we know it is a waste of political capital to seek new state applications. The issue is Congress's refusal to call, not the failure of the states to apply. We know, based on Supreme Court decisions regarding the well-settled principle of the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause, that as Congress and a convention are identical as to constitutional authority, effect, limit, and exclusiveness, they and the citizens they represent form a legal class, meaning equal treatment under the law. As we know, this resolves all operational questions, including terms and conditions of delegate election, such as number of delegates, term of office, representation area, qualifications for office, election laws, voting ratio for proposed amendment passage, powers and limitations of office, loyalty issues, speech and debate immunities, and the manner of vote at the convention itself, as they are identical to Congress. We know Article 5 mandates Congress decide the time and location of the convention. Given the exorbitant cost of a physical convention and the political and economic advantages of a virtual convention, Congress is likely to effect this alternative as it cannot finance the convention. As the convention only has amendment proposal power and thus no means of income, we know delegates will be unpaid volunteers. We know this limitation also means election campaigns will be entirely issue-oriented. We know the agenda of the convention, as the states have already addressed nearly all of today's political issues with petitions to the convention for proposed amendments submitted within their applications for a convention call. We know the states can politically control the convention agenda in real time. but not by means of fiduciary principles as some have asserted. We know there will be no runaway convention, as federal criminal law prohibits this. We know the convention will be entirely public. We know most dangerous convention is a single-subject convention with a predetermined political outcome. This kind of convention means exclusion of all political opposition and offers no reason for citizen participation of all issues are predetermined, thus excluding debate and vote. Such a convention violates the speech and debate clause as well as Article 5 and therefore is unconstitutional. In sum, we know a convention is just like Congress with all significant aspects. Thus, there is no real obstacle to holding a convention. What about the question before this panel? The actual question, of course, is not political support of a convention, but whether to politically support giving the government official veto authority of the Constitution. As the DOJ will officially resolve this question shortly, there really is nothing to decide. If the government prosecutes for this documented violation of oath of office, public confrontations with members of Congress of their assumed right of veto are in order. Such confrontations will bring about a convention call. If not, it will not matter, as it will be official government policy. Congress and the government can veto the Constitution as they please. Thank you.
Next, we have George Friday, who is the National Field Organizer for the Bill of Rights Defense Committee and coordinator of the Independent Progressive Politics Network. She co-chairs the Green Party U.S. Black and Women's Caucuses and the North Carolina Green Party, and she served on several boards and steering committees, including the Institute for Southern Studies, Fair Vote, Grassroots Policy Project, American Friends Service Committee, and others. So welcome, George.
Good afternoon. History. When I say that word history, what do most of you think about? It's been referred to a lot today, starting with this morning, in terms of invoking liberty and our framing fathers and our founding fathers. Are most of you maybe filled with a sense of pride, a sense of uniqueness and the wonderful right of being a citizen in this country? Or maybe not any particular emotion or feeling. What I want you to consider, though, is the reality for those of us for whom hearing the word history within the reality of this country does not evoke pride, rarely invokes emotions that are positive, and it takes effort to find those examples that feed our spirit, that remind us of liberty, that remind us of what a delight it is to be a resident and citizen of this country. And I name that as I start my brief remarks, and I'll do my best to be brief, is that not everyone is going to have the same response to the concept of the history of our United States as many of you might have, and certainly as many of our speakers might have. And part of my strategy, and I am going to talk about the strategy it takes to win, as opposed to a theory about whether or not we should do it. I'm assuming we're going to do it. I'm going to tell you how to win. So acknowledging the fact that history doesn't resonate the same way with all of us in all communities in a meaningful way is essential and required for us to win. So I wanted to name that right out. I also want to, and Annabelle talked about this a little bit, I've done work for justice with a capital J most of my adult life and some of my teen life, I guess, I would say youth life when I was 12 and 13. And I've been struck by the fact that most of the reaction that we see from people, including people on the left or right, and while I'm a Green Party person now, that's since 2008, up until then I was independent. Independent because the Democrats nor the Republicans have ever done anything for me in my reality. And most of my friends, frankly, would be described as maybe libertarian. I'm going to say NASCAR fans. They're certainly not radical or progressive, the people I love. Not just like Annabelle or get along with, but love. And we have some fierce conversations. But what I've observed in my experiences with those folks is often they're fueled by fear. Fear, not faith. This morning when Mark was talking, part of the time he was speaking, I had to take a deep breath and kind of catch myself because I started to get kind of teary. Because I am one of those patriots in terms of the love I have for the people in this country, the love I have for the potential of the people in this country. And based on that love and that potential, and with all due respect of all the brilliance in this room, y'all are way short of what you need in terms of intellectual imagination in this room. It's not a disrespect to anybody except to say that having the genius, the imagination, the insight, and the faith of the communities of color that live within these borders is missing, and unless we've got it, we do not have the formula to win. We only have the formula to do what y'all have done. What can sometimes be described as, and again, no disrespect, an intellectual exercise, but not an engagement in the imagination to figure out what are the steps to winning. Come on, y'all. Whew. So, what I encourage us to think about is to create a process that may result in a document that's not a reaction to what we're terrified might occur, or as a limit to what rights or privilege we might share, but as a reflection of our faith in shared values and a collective vision of what we could create together with specifics about what at least we'll be able to have as rights and privileges. But y'all know what? We are years away from that. Years! Now, I'm down for doing the work, but it cannot be rushed. I get together in a year, but we ain't got to be anywhere in 18 months because the work needs to be done to build a movement. And we haven't done that work. If we'd done it, this room would look a little different. And again, it's no disrespect. This is where we are. But the work in terms of strategically connecting with people that, you know what? They don't need to understand what Article 5 means. They don't need to break down all of the details and the legal precedents. You know what they need to hear? A validation of their own reality that something is not working. And an invitation to participate in creating something that might work. That's it. People will show up. Now, there are years of work for us to develop what is a win. Now, I'm going to define what a win is, and then I'll sit down. That's pretty good, huh? This is George Friday's definition of a win because it involves my role in it. To facilitate building relationships with skills necessary so that diverse communities have the capacity and the collective power for transformational change. Now, that includes, but is not limited to, a constitutional convention. Because if you build that power, that power is transferable. Whether that power is about us building a new school or us having a constitutional convention, you have to build the power. That happens by building relationships. It happens by your challenging yourself to sit down with people who may not reflect all of your political ideas or your political principles, but guess what? They're going to share your values. They're going to want water that's clean enough to fish from. They're going to want an education for their children and their grandchildren so that nobody's educational or intellectual potential is not realized. They're going to want, actually, there are folks that have, a friend of mine is part of a faith that they send out something every month, the daily word, and she goes to the day and reads it. It's very spiritually great. My daily word comes out of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And every day I flip to a page and I read one, and I get a little verklempt like I did this morning when Mark was talking. But it also reminds me of why I'm here. So it's that I want us to engage each other in. And that's the strategy to begin winning. Now, this is our first date, so I won't overwhelm you with, the world according to George. But I will invite you to challenge yourself to think about what are the strategic alliances I need to win? And how do I develop the skills to be able to have relationships of principle, authenticity, and integrity with people who may not share every political value I have?
Next up, Jefferson Smith, who is an Oregon state representative. He's founder of the Bus Project, which is a volunteer-driven nonprofit organization that engages young people in progressive politics and catalyzes action around progressive issues in the state of Oregon. And he is recently, as of recently, an announced candidate for mayor of Portland.
It has been almost 11 years to the day since I last spoke in this room as a law student. I think there are two fundamental challenges facing a constitutional convention, speaking in terms of strategy. I want to entitle my brief portion, An Alien Invasion and Regis Philbin. The Oregon Constitution is horribly long, and I pick my adjective purposefully. I co-sponsored a bill along with a handful of others, largely as a modest proposal to amend the Oregon Constitution and, in fact, convene an Oregon Constitutional Convention. I debated with a thoughtful colleague, and our argument broke down roughly into two questions that you've already begun to face. One, could we even get the negotiation to happen? And two, would we trust it enough that we would get something better than we have? Our Constitution originally had as militating causes Revolutionary War, formation of a country, independence from an English king. So to me, the first strategic question is, can we generate a mass movement without a militating event? Or, in fact, are those militating events occurring, or will they occur? Or could we manufacture them? This is the alien invasion question. The Independence Day, it was a Michael Bay movie. I think it was Michael Bay. If it wasn't, it should have been. And the whole world came together around the idea of the alien invasion. Could the current economic crisis, perhaps it's not sharp enough, serve as that sort of thing? Can slower decay of the American experiment still motivate the same kind of crisis energy? That, to me, is the first question. Second question, law school mate of mine. He was actually a year ahead of me, but then we clerked together on the Ninth Circuit. And he is now a professor at the University of Washington Law School. And he was a game show addict. He paid his way through law school by being a 3-day champion on Wheel of Fortune. And it's a really great gig to do. It's great. And we would debate, and by that I mean I would listen to him for long periods of time about game show strategy. We would spend, I believe it was every Thursday, lunch at the Sioux Plantation in Pasadena, while he provided me an hour-long exegesis on the previous evening's Survivor. Okay. He explained to me that the current game show fad at that time was not just Survivor, it was Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? And Who Wants to Be a Millionaire has lifelines. This is going to take me about a minute and a half more, and then I'll be done. Can anybody name the lifelines quickly? Phone a friend? 50-50 and ask the audience. Okay? And we would debate which is the best. How many people have their favorite lifeline is 50-50? Raise your hand. Okay? Who likes phone a friend? Find experts, get a list of 12 of them. Who likes ask the audience? That's why you're here. Although half of you didn't vote. And that's part of her problem that she is facing, that she is bringing to our attention. So it turns out, according to him, the best lifeline is ask the audience. I thought it might be phone a friend. Find your 12 experts, each on a different topic. The question comes to that topic, call your expert friend, they tell you the answer. Turns out ask the audience is better. All of us, according to him, all of us is smarter than any of us. That gives some faith, except for when the contestant says, I think it might be B. And that screws up the sample, and they get it wrong. And to me, one of the fundamental, maybe the fundamental challenge of democracy now, of our discourse now, is you have huge dollars and huge interests yelling, I think it might be B. In fact, I am sure it's B. So to me, the second strategic question is, can we craft the kind of conversation that allows us to get to our best answers? And I have some thoughts on that, but given the time we have, I'll offer them in response to a question, whether you ask that question or not. And in conclusion, I will just say, to me, it will boil down to the two questions. One, can we get the debate we need? Can we solve the alien invasion question? And second, can we make that negotiation, can we make that discussion work? And that is why we need Regis Philbin. Thanks.
Okay. Next, we have Shane Larsen, who has served as the legislative director for the 700,000 member strong Communications Workers of America since April of 2010. Shane is a native of South Dakota. He attended Georgetown's Walsh School of Foreign Service, earning a BSFS in international politics. And he also serves on the National Executive Board of Pride at Work, which is the LGBT constituency group of the AFL-CIO. And I want to note quickly that I am thrilled to have everybody here, but Shane represents a really particularly interesting constituency because the CWA is the one union that's really taken a strong stand consistently on issues of structural reform, and he's been at the helm of that. So please welcome him with me.
Thanks. I really want to thank the conference conveners for putting this together, and especially for inviting CWA to participate in this. It's something that we've been very interested in and have been following, and I'm really honored to be able to represent CWA. As David mentioned, we have approximately 700,000 active and retired members at CWA who come from the telecom industry, from the media industry, from airline industry, from manufacturing, and from the public sector. It's a broad and diverse group of membership. And it's also members from all over this country who represent a wide variety of ideologies. We have members that are very proud and very active Tea Party members, and we have some very proud and very active avowed socialists as well. And it's a broad group, but it's one thing that unites our entire membership across the board, and that is what is really kind of a fundamental American belief, going back to the Constitution, which is a very avowed and strong belief in checks and balances against the concentration of power. And for our members, it's the checks and balances that collective bargaining and organizing provide in the workplace against the concentration of power at the workplace, so that there is a balance there. And it's one thing that our membership and our leadership of our union have brought in terms of not just the efforts that we work at the bargaining table to provide living wages and benefits and good working conditions for our members and their families, and to struggle and keep our membership in the middle class. But it's also something that we bring to the policy battles and the legislative battles on the federal level. We are focused on really 4 key areas, which is strengthening and expanding the fundamental human right to organizing and collective bargaining, providing for retirement security, a sound retirement security for our members, for health care for all, and for, sorry, I just drew a blank, and for good jobs for all. One thing that we've really been focused on is as we try to get to that place where we can see advancement on all those issues, we have found that, in the words of Cenk from the earlier panel, is that, and a number of folks today have talked about this, is that our current system is fundamentally broken. And I'm not saying that because we're frustrated that the solutions at the end of the day are progressive solutions or the solutions that we are specifically advocating for. What our level of frustration and why we believe that the system is currently fundamentally broken is because of the fact that they're not even on the agenda. Those issues are not on the agenda of what we believe this country should be addressing and what our membership really want to see the leadership in this country addressing. What we're seeing is the corporate benefactors dictating what the political leadership in Washington is dictating of the agenda for the day. And that is then being reinforced and driven by the corporate media as well. And then further, as Jefferson just talked about, the fact that you've got the corporate media, the corporations pouring billions of dollars into a messaging strategy of the answer's B, driving that message as much as possible. So our issues aren't even on the agenda or aren't even getting addressed. And that's what's really driving our fundamental issue of why we believe that we need to fix our current political system. Is the answer in Article 5 Constitutional Convention? We're not sure yet, but we're glad that we're having this argument and this discussion about whether or not that needs to happen so we can advance with some potential fixes. Our recent struggle, part of this panel's discussion topic was what would it take for an organization like CWA, a membership organization, to get involved in the process, and what would it take to achieve some sort of a outcome, positive outcome? And really, our recent struggle that we conducted over the last winter to reform the Senate rules was really a very enlightening experience for us. Both one in how do we form a united front amongst labor, because I just want to reiterate, labor is not this huge monolithic force where everyone is on the same page. We have public sector, we have private sector, we have blue collar, we have white collar. It's a broad and diverse group as well. But how do we get a united labor front? How do we develop a broad coalition to fight for those reforms? And then especially, how do we engage our membership? And it was in the Senate rules fight that CWA joined with our good friends from Common Cause and the Sierra Club to help lead that effort to fix the Senate rules, especially focusing on the filibuster. And going into this battle, we were really unsure that we were going to be able to especially utilize what we consider our greatest strength, which is mobilizing our 700,000 members around this. Especially when we're dealing with a complex, wonky, inside the Beltway issue that involved reforming a political institution. While that's sexy and exciting enough for all of us to give up our weekend and spend a whole weekend together talking about something like that, it's not necessarily the first thing that comes to a mind to someone that's going out every day struggling to support their family by putting up telephone lines. That's not the first thing that comes to their mind. So it was a question of, can we engage our greatest strength, our membership? And for us, one of the really educational pieces was that engaging with our membership, they're frustrated and angry because they're not seeing what I talked about earlier, is the people that they elected and their political institutions addressing and dealing with the issues that they care the most about. And when we were explaining the Senate rules process, and the fact that you need 60 votes to simply have a debate on an issue, that they became outraged. And it was especially when I identified with that philosophical fundamental issue that when the coalition came up with a fix and united around Senator Jeff Merkley's from Oregon's proposal of having a talking filibuster, that if you're going to filibuster, you don't simply tell your party leadership representative to object for you while you run out and spend the evening raising a couple $1 million. That instead what you need to do is strap on a pair of Depends, walk down to the Senate floor, and talk and talk and talk until you can't talk anymore. That's what the filibuster is. And when we were able to move that out, the membership got engaged and involved in the process. So it was a really helpful exercise for us. We didn't achieve the victory that we had hoped, but the other learning point for us was, and as we explained to the membership, the really key thing in a struggle like this is the fact that you have to be honest that a fight like this doesn't happen you don't get a solution overnight. You've got to gird your loins for a long struggle and a long battle. And so that was the first step for us, and we think that it's a possibility to do. So.
Next, we have Curtis Olofsson, who's been a member of the North Dakota State Senate since 2006 and serves as the vice chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee. He was the first legislator in the nation to pass what is called the National Debt Relief Amendment, and he's since assumed the position of national spokesman for the National Debt Relief Amendment on behalf of RestoringFreedom.org, and has published numerous articles and appeared on a variety of talk radio shows and other venues in support of that amendment.
Thank you, David. It's a great honor and a privilege for me to be here today and take part in this conference. I want to thank the organizers, Professor Lessig and Mark Meckler from the Tea Party Patriots. And I found particular resonance in Mark Meckler's comment this morning that Americans are an extraordinary people, and we are certainly attending an extraordinary event here today and having an extraordinary discussion. So I commend them for organizing this conference. Now, there are three things you need to know about me. I'm very proud of my Icelandic heritage. I'm very passionate about politics, and I'm an obnoxiously proud dad. But when you mix all of those things together, sometimes you achieve unexpected results. When my son was 5 years old, he was watching a program on TV on ethnicity and genealogy, and he turned to his mother and said, "Mom, I'm half Icelandic and half Republican, right?" So be careful what you say around young children. I want to talk about the effort I'm involved in, as have a lot of other presenters today talked about the efforts they are involved in, and I think that's good for all of us attending this conference to hear what ideas are floating around out there on the table. But I want to talk about it not just to promote our idea. I want to talk about it because I think it's a perfect segue into what I perceive to be the mission of this panel today. The National Debt Relief Amendment was first formulated and proposed by RestoringFreedom.org. It consists of 18 words, which are: an increase in the federal debt requires approval from a majority of the legislatures of the separate states. It's very simple, very easy to understand. It is difficult to misinterpret or misrepresent, and it is nonpartisan for a very simple reason. The federal debt is a nonpartisan problem. We all have to acknowledge that the federal debt has increased under the control of both parties, and it will require bipartisan solutions to solve this problem. The National Debt Relief Amendment resolutions that we are promoting in each state has limiting language, specifically stating that the delegates are limited to the consideration of this proposed amendment and this amendment only. And as we talk about what this panel is supposed to do today, we're talking about strategy on how you would go about formulating, promoting, passing, and adopting an amendment to the U.S. Constitution. And that's serious business. Amending the U.S. Constitution is a difficult challenge, and it should be. So we understand that going in. So we believe at RestoringFreedom.org, we believe that there are two elements that are required if you are to be successful in this difficult challenge. Number one, you have to have a very simple, easy to understand amendment, proposing one idea, and you have to have limiting language, limiting the convention to the consideration of that one idea. Secondly, any amendment that has any chance whatsoever of being adopted in the end has to have bipartisan appeal. If you have a partisan amendment, it's likely going nowhere. Now, at RestoringFreedom.org, we believe that our founding fathers intended that state legislators would understand that when they see a problem that exists at the federal level that Congress is not addressing and not solving, we have an obligation as state legislators to use our rights under Article 5 to solve that problem. And if ever there was an issue in the history of our country that we need to step in and invoke our rights under Article 5, the crushing federal debt is the issue, and the time is now. Before I use up all of my time, I think I'll conclude with a quote from Winston Churchill, because I don't want to be accused of what Winston Churchill once said of his political adversaries. He has the rare talent of compressing the greatest number of words into the least amount of thought. Please visit our website at RestoringFreedom.org.
Thank you. And next up, Bill Norden, who is the chairman of the Arizona State Constitutional Commemoration Committee and the founder of Constitution Week, and he is the constitutional coordinator for the Tea Party Patriots and has played a significant role in pulling together this conference and these panels.
I'm halfway tempted to do as Annabelle did because I'm a little short in stature here, and these podiums sometimes seem a little large, but it's great to be here. In fact, I think that we kind of take it for granted, the fact that we're here to talk about what we're talking about today. Many, many years ago, although it's not very many years ago when we look at human history, it wasn't very far from here where a king had made it illegal for a group just like this to meet. And not too far from here, we have some great Americans that sacrificed their lives to make it possible for us to meet in a group just like this. So it's fantastic that we've been able to gather together. And I thank those that went on before us, those Americans that were before us that helped to bring this kind of activity to modern times. And it reminds me of a story of a conversation that I had with my 8-year-old daughter. This is a couple years ago. She's 10 years old now. But we were having this conversation. She said, "Daddy, why can't we shoot off fireworks in our own yard?" Now, in Arizona, we couldn't shoot off anything, although thanks to my friend Andy Biggs, we can now have sparklers and a few things like that. But at this time, nothing. We couldn't shoot off sparklers, firecrackers, nothing. And I said, well, government doesn't really think we're responsible enough to handle fireworks in our own yard. And she said, "But Daddy, you shoot off fireworks, the big fireworks, during Constitution Week." And we do. Just last weekend, we had our big Constitution Week event, big 4th of July style fireworks show. And I said, "That's right, I do, but I have to get government's permission to do that." And she said, "Well, that's kind of strange. So they think you're responsible enough to shoot off the big fireworks, but not the little ones in your own yard?" And I said, "Yeah, that's kind of odd." And she said, "Yeah." So she continues to ask me questions like this. Why is government doing this? Why is government doing that? Finally, as an 8-year-old, out of frustration, she said, "Daddy, why don't we just tell government to stop?" And I said, "Well, government's gotten a little bit too big, a little bit too powerful, so it's kind of hard to tell government to stop sometimes." And she said, "Oh, like a king." I said, "Exactly like a king." And then she said, "Oh, no. Don't tell me we have to go through that again." And I said, "Well, what are you talking about?" She said, Revolutionary War and things like that. And I said, we may have to rise up against our government, but we have tools that were provided to us that the founders never had. We have the ability to meet, assemble like this. It's legal for us to do this now. We have the ability to vote. What an amazing power the right to vote is. The ability to, in a 6-year cycle, we can replace our entire government if we have the will to do so. Really an amazing power. We have the right to gather together and petition our government for a redress of grievances. Really some just amazing things. And so I was excited to tell her that I was coming to a conference like this to participate in one of these things in which we can tell our government that enough's enough. We can rise up against the king, so to speak, but what a great opportunity to do it by peaceful means and to come together on both sides of the aisle and try to figure out if we can make this work. Now, personally, I believe that a Article 5 convention is a great provision, and I'm glad that it's in the Constitution. But I do not think that now is the time to do it. And the reason why is because of a couple of key things. First of all, I don't believe we're educated enough. The founders were amazing. When they got together in Philadelphia in 1787, they decided to get together to work out their system of self-government with purpose and wisdom, rather than by conflict and by force and things like that. And so they decided to talk it. So what did Madison do to prepare? Madison wrote to his friend, Thomas Jefferson, "Send me books on philosophy and government and history." And he sent him books, but not just one or two. He sent him books by the hundreds. And Madison prepared. And the other delegates said that he was the most able among them. And that's really what we need to do. If we want to really understand how we can come together in a Article 5 convention, we've got to educate ourselves. In fact, Thomas Jefferson said that the only true corrective to constitutional abuses is education. And on another occasion, he said, if we just enlighten the people, and tyranny and oppression will vanish like evil spirits at the dawn of day. And so education is incredibly important. And so what do we need to be educated in? I believe we need to be educated in our history, not just in the history of our nation, but the history of the world. That's what the founders did. They tried to understand what works and what doesn't work. They went way back and understood natural law from Cicero and Blackstone. Or they go back and understand mixed governments, or as we call it today, checks and balances, separation of power, from Montesquieu and Polybius. And they went way back in history and figured out what works and what doesn't work. They discovered natural law principles as it relates to human happiness and government and things like that. They really didn't have many original ideas. They just gathered together all these great ideas from history. And that's still something that I think that we need to do today. So, for example, I'm hearing an awful lot of people talk about how terrible the corporations are and how they're buying our congressmen and our senators and how they're basically controlling everything. I agree with that. I think it's terrible. So the reason why this is the case, though, it's kind of funny. Way back in the late 1800s, this started being what was very popular was, hey, corporations are taking over, they're controlling everything, they're controlling all of the state governments. Well, what did we do? We decided, let's take power away from the state governments and let's elect our senators directly. Well, what does that ended up happening? What ended up happening now is our senators are even more corrupt and are bought off even more by these powerful interests. Why? Because it's cheaper now than it was back when they had to buy out every single state legislature. They can now do it at a lot lower cost. The corporations pushed for it. They loved it, and they love it today. So I believe that if we are to have a constitutional convention or an Article 5 convention, we need to really look at the wisdom of the founders, because they worked out virtually every problem I believe that we face today. They had solutions to. And if we go back to some of their original solutions, then we could see a lot of the fixes, the problems that I'm seeing here today. Now, obviously, we don't want to go back to things like slavery, and neither did the founders want to go back to that. They hoped to try to get rid of it. They tried, and they worked out as well as they could, and it's unfortunate that we had to do it the way that we did. So we're certainly not advocating going back to some of those things, but we're advocating that we go back to some of the great wisdom of the founders, so that this country could once again be exactly what Benjamin Franklin said it was at the close of the convention when he said, "I have often looked at that chair behind the president without being able to tell whether that carving of the sun was rising or setting. But now, at length, I have the happiness to know that it is a rising and not a setting sun." I still think this nation is a rising sun. And this is a great sign of that we can come together and figure out how we can continue to make it that rising sun. And that is my hope in these efforts. And I thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to ask a few questions of the panelists myself, and then try to leave 10 or so minutes for questions from the audience. First, sort of obvious one, Annabelle started with the notion of this as a first date. Bill has talked about the need for greater education of our populace before we can achieve a convention. You're the coffee party, and he's the tea party. Would you both personally be willing, and do you think your memberships would be willing to have gatherings like this moving forward, where we bring together the left and the right, coffee party, tea party, and all sorts of other organizations to talk about the Constitution generally, the issues of our time, and the possibility of amending the Constitution through a convention or otherwise?
Okay, I go first. Well, first of all, I want to clarify that Coffee Party is not the left version of the Tea Party. I think there was kind of an assumption in that. It's a transpartisan movement focused on trying to get the majority of Americans engaged in the democratic process and emphasizing civil dialogue as a way to bring people together and go forward. But I know that, in a way, this feels like what the Coffee Party is about, you know. In fact, secretly, it is a coffee party meetup. So yeah, I'm sure they would be interested, and I know there'd be some who would be a little weary about talking to the Tea Party, but I think the majority would be very interested in the opportunity.
First of all, I want to clarify that although I am part of the Tea Party and I'm the constitutional education coordinator for the Tea Party, I don't speak for the Tea Party. In fact, if I did try to speak for the Tea Party, the Tea Party is a ground-up organization. They wouldn't like it very much. In fact, some of our politicians who have tried to do official answers to the presidential State of the Union things, often the Tea Party will say, who are they to think that they can give their answer for us? So I don't speak for the Tea Party, but I do know that people are very open to an open dialogue. I mean, we want to try to figure out what's wrong with our nation. The thing that's amazing a lot of people is that the Tea Party is not partisan. In fact, some of you may be very surprised that a lot of the Republicans that the Tea Party elected probably won't be in office this next time around because they're nonpartisan when it comes to getting rid of politicians that are not listening to the people or following the Constitution. The Tea Partiers that I know would love to sit down with anybody to try to figure out how we can resolve our nation's problems.
Okay. So that's yes and yes.
Yes.
All right, great.
That would have been much shorter.
Shane, I wanted to ask, you guys, as the CWA, are, in my mind, notably focused on issues of structural reform, on the filibuster reform you were talking about before, on trying to do something around campaign finance, remediate Citizens United, institute public financing. I ran for Congress last cycle, and I filled out questionnaires from unions asking me if I supported this thing they believed in, that thing they believed in. And I won't name the union here, but one of the unions asked me to assert that I would not do anything to prevent them from engaging in independent expenditures. So basically asked me to say that I believe in the Citizens United decision, would do what I could to uphold it. And I answered no to that question. But I think to get labor to the point where they're willing to consider a convention about structural reforms, we need to move them to be active in trying to reform those structures that benefit them, and I think that campaign finance is a clear one between here and there before we even get to the conversation about tactics. So what do you think it'll take to get the rest of labor to focus on those sorts of issues the way that you guys are?
Well, as I said in my remarks, labor is not a monolithic force where all the leadership and all the unions think alike. But that being said, there is a growing concern, especially as we come out of the 2010 elections and going through these 2011 elections in this last legislative cycle, of seeing the immense spending of corporations in the political and legislative process and their ability to really dominate the entire process. And even some of the largest unions out there are never going to be able to compete with that level of spending. So it's an evolving issue, and I think that we are getting there.
And are there other people in this room who can help expedite that
Well, for anyone in the room who's a labor union member, unions are democratic institutions. So agitate and raise that issue. And for those of you that have relationships, start the reach out and start the dialogue. We, on a staff level and from our elected leadership, are constantly having conversations with our counterparts. So talk about it, get engaged.
And so I want to leave room for audience questions, but I wanted to ask Curtis if it's possible to do this, to do a 2-minute synopsis of what it actually looked like to get your resolution through your assembly. Who were the constituencies involved? Was it a bipartisan effort? Were there people on the outside agitating, or was it more of an inside job?
Well, as you said in my introduction, I was the first legislator in the nation to pass the National Debt Relief Amendment. And there was a bit of opposition from the John Birch Society, which over the fear-mongering issue, but I was quickly able to diffuse those arguments because if you do some basic research and rational thought, you begin to understand that those fears are unfounded. And I did get bipartisan support for the effort in North Dakota. There was bipartisan support in both chambers. Then, in my capacity as national spokesman for the National Debt Relief Amendment, I went to Louisiana in May and testified in the House hearing, and there it passed in the House on a unanimous vote, so obviously bipartisan support. I went back in the Senate and testified in June, and it passed in the Louisiana Senate by a vote of 24-7, again with bipartisan support. And what is notable about North Dakota and Louisiana being the first two to pass the National Debt Relief Amendment to try to get our federal debt under control is the fact that, and I'm going to be a little parochial here, North Dakota has to be ranked as one of the most fiscally responsible states in the nation. We have a huge budget surplus. Our economy is booming. We have virtually zero unemployment, and it's not just oil, it's a result of making good decisions. So we understand fiscal responsibility. What's notable about Louisiana is this. Louisiana is one of two states in the nation which has over 50% of its state budget funded by federal dollars. So even in Louisiana, they understand that the course we are on is unsustainable. And so, yes, this will continue to, I believe, generate bipartisan support, and because good people from all parts of the political spectrum understand, and whether it's the national debt relief, the debt problem, or any other problem facing our nation, good people from all parts of the political spectrum can be concerned about a serious challenge facing our nation for different reasons, and that's okay. And those are the discussions that we need to have, and the one we are having today.
Thank you.